Ally Kostel grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, but her heart was set on attending the University of Mississippi. When she finally made it there, she felt as though she had reached the height of her dreams. But her story soon took a grim turn. Investigators later remarked that there were no signs or warnings that could have prepared Ally's friends for the tragedy that unfolded on that July afternoon. Detectives at the scene were stunned that anyone could commit such a crime against a kind, easygoing student. Their focus quickly shifted to their primary suspect, another student whose hidden motives no one had seen coming. Alexandria Kostel was born on September 11, 1997, in St. Louis, Missouri. Her family soon began calling her Ally, the nickname she would be lovingly known by for the rest of her life. She was the daughter of Cindy and Keith Kostel and the older sister of her brother, Andrew. Even as a child, Ally displayed a strong dedication to her schoolwork and a natural athletic ability. These qualities made her shine as an exceptional high school student. Alongside her academic achievements, Ally was involved in cheerleading, track and field, and the golf team, and she was also a member of the National Honor Society. Her adventurous nature took her abroad to Peru and Africa, where she volunteered by teaching English to young children. Cindy and Keith were immensely proud of her, as Ally's warmth and bright spirit left a lasting impact on everyone she met. She adored both animals and children, often babysitting to earn extra money, and her gentle personality quickly made her a favorite among the families she worked with. Ally also loved walking dogs and was passionate about yoga and running half marathons. Her spiritual outlook and ever-present smile made her easy for anyone to approach. During this chapter of her life, she grew especially close to Maddie Norris. The two became inseparable, sharing their hopes and secrets as if they had known each other for lifetimes. Their bond felt more like a sisterhood, leading them into countless shared adventures. After graduating in 2016, Ally began her studies in business administration at the University of Mississippi. She was overjoyed to join a school steeped in tradition, history, and a vibrant football culture. Her parents loved seeing how much happiness this new phase brought her. Ally also hoped that, during her time there, she might meet a kind Southern boy and eventually build a family of her own. Even with the miles between them, her bond with Maddie stayed just as strong. Those who knew Ally weren't surprised to see her flourish both academically and socially. She quickly formed new, meaningful connections, including a close friendship with Elizabeth, whom she met at a campus party. Their shared interests helped deepen their relationship and make it an important part of Ally's college experience. In this new circle of people in her life, one person became especially significant to Ally, fueled in part by her hopeful, romantic nature. She developed an interest in Brandon Teisfeld, a young man just a year older than she was, originally from Fort Worth, Texas. A quick note before we continue. As you know, on Uncover Eyes, we release new videos every other day. Many of you have reached out expressing a desire for daily content, so we've launched a new channel, also focused on real-life crime stories, called Secret Crime Mysteries. On the days we don't post videos on Uncover Eyes, we'll be uploading them on Secret Crime Mysteries. This means if you're looking for daily doses of astonishing real-life crime cases, don't hesitate to subscribe. Without further ado, let's dive into today's case. Brandon was the son of Daniel Teisfeld, a medical professional, and had grown up surrounded by love and comfort. Raised in a devoted Christian household, he enjoyed a childhood full of outdoor pursuits, hunting, fishing, and exploring the wide-open spaces of Texas. As he got older, Brandon also proved to be a talented football player at his school. Like Ally, he enrolled in the University of Mississippi's business program. The two shared mutual friends and even found themselves in some of the same classes. Still, Brandon's personality contrasted sharply with Ally's. Yet, as the saying goes, sometimes opposites are drawn to one another. According to local records, Brandon was arrested in April 2017 for public intoxication and possessing a fake ID. This wasn't his only brush with the law. He was involved in another incident, though the Oxford Police Department later confirmed that the records of this case were expunged and sealed. Despite these isolated incidents and the generally good conduct Brandon displayed, there was someone who did not find him particularly likable and had reasons for such a perception. Rex Revita, another student who lived in a dormitory across the hall from Brandon during their freshman year, frequently encountered him. Rex found Brandon's behavior objectionable, considering him a spoiled daddy's boy. According to Rex, Brandon often boasted about his father's wealth and how it could get him out of any trouble, which Rex found particularly annoying. Additionally, Rex had noticed another particularly unpleasant trait in Brandon. He often treated women in a degrading manner. One night when Ally and Brandon crossed paths at a local bar, she felt an immediate attraction. It didn't take long for them to start dating occasionally, though Ally wished they spent more time together. She often brought him along as her date to most of her parties. However, to almost everyone observing their developing relationship, it was clear that Brandon wasn't as enamored with Ally as she was with him. Despite this, Ally seemed blinded by her initial impression and Brandon's good looks, never seeing through the facade. The evident disinterest from Brandon and his flaws, which were apparent to everyone else, went unnoticed by Ally. She was convinced she had found her dream man and envisioned a future with a home and family. As weeks and months passed, their relationship grew complicated. Around their second year in college, driven by her intense feelings, Ally sent Brandon numerous late-night texts while she was out partying, eager to chat with him. Without any explanation, he blocked her number. During this time, Maddie visited Oxford to see her friend and unofficial sister. Naturally, she was excited to meet the new man in Ally's life, but to her surprise, Brandon didn't show up. During that visit, Maddie became concerned about Brandon's clear detachment, despite the affection Ally lavished on him. Despite this, Ally seemed to be doing well in many other areas of her life. By her third year, she had formed a strong friendship with another university student named Morgan. It was around this time that Brandon inexplicably reappeared as if nothing had happened, seeking to reconnect with Ally. Ally interpreted this gesture as a sign of mutual romantic interest and became filled with hope. However, she was the only one who saw it that way. To everyone else, it was strange, knowing that Brandon had no genuine feelings for her. One of the most astonished by the situation was Rex. Upon learning about the supposed romance between Ally and Brandon, he believed that the young Texan was emotionally manipulating her, making her think he loved her, something Rex was sure was false. Deep down, Ally might have been aware of Brandon's lack of affection. This could explain why her closest friends and even her parents knew very little about him. References to Brandon and their relationship were quite vague. Consequently, none of Ally's close ones were aware of the emotional abuse she was experiencing. Ally often found herself in tears over the man she loved. Her roommate at the time occasionally noticed the sadness in Ally's eyes. However, as she mentioned in a later interview, Ally was a girl who radiated pure light and had the ability to appear happy even when she was sad. According to her, Ally's kindness blinded her to others' malice, making her see people as better than they actually were. In April 2019, Ally told Brandon that she was worried she might be pregnant and sent him a picture of a home pregnancy test. The results were inconclusive, but given the gravity of the situation, Ally expressed her desire to discuss it in person. Brandon's immediate response was like a cold shower. He bluntly stated he had no intention of staying with her if she was indeed pregnant. Over the next 3 months, Ally tried to meet with him to talk about it, but Brandon avoided her at all costs. Sometimes he would agree to meet and then cancel at the last minute. Other times, he simply wouldn't show up and offered no explanation afterward. Amid this emotional roller coaster, Ally continued with her life, hoping the situation would improve, and only communicated with Brandon electronically. Unbeknownst to her, Brandon was spending long hours trying to find a solution to what he saw as a major problem. He spent days researching online about medications and clinics for terminating a pregnancy. Unsatisfied with these options, he even considered more extreme scenarios, looking up how to use a weapon and hide a crime. In the midst of the uncertainty about their relationship status, the vacation period arrived. Ally decided not to travel back home to Missouri. Given that she was in her final year and had high academic ambitions, she chose to stay at the university in July to attend a summer course. Additionally, she was teaching fitness classes at the time, which motivated her to sacrifice her break to earn extra money for her expenses. However, Cindy and Keith were not willing to miss the opportunity to be with their daughter. They informed her that they would come to visit. Ally was overjoyed at the news. Once her parents arrived at her apartment, the three of them had the most wonderful days together. Ally and her mother went shopping and chatted endlessly about countless things. There was so much to catch up on that the hours seemed too short. Knowing Ally's love for the sea and the beach, Cindy gifted her several new items, all with a marine theme, to reflect her interests in her home. Ally, in turn, repeatedly asked her mother to cook her favorite dishes. When it was time to say goodbye in mid-July 2019, Ally wished her parents could stay for at least one more day. As Cindy and Keith headed back home, they comforted themselves with the thought that their next reunion was just around the corner and they just needed to be patient. Shortly after, Brandon contacted Ally via text message. Just as he had done previously, disappearing and reappearing months later as if nothing had happened. This time he requested a meeting to discuss the delicate matter in person. On Friday, July 19, 2019, back in St. Louis, Cindy called her daughter to confirm everything was all right. True to her word, Ally went to a bar that night. A while later, surveillance cameras captured her leaving the place, wearing a white shirt and blue shorts, with her head down, seemingly texting. The footage shows her in front of the door, though she doesn't enter the establishment. Afterward, Ally returned home but left again without her roommate hearing. Around midnight, she finally met up with Brandon. The details of what transpired next have been elusive to the authorities. No one knows what was said or the tone of their conversation. It's assumed there were accusations and clarifications, but this remains speculative. What is certain is that Ally and Brandon met face to face at a lake, a vast area surrounded by numerous campsites and recreational spaces. Due to its size and characteristics, the Sheriff's Department has long patrolled its various nooks and crannies. During the early hours of Saturday, July 20th, 2019, the moonlight was the only illumination for the patrolling officers. The prevailing darkness was far from romantic. According to police sources, a local resident walking their dog reported hearing gunshots in the early hours of that morning between 2:15 and 2:30 a.m. The attacker fled the scene. Around 10:30 a.m., a police investigator was on patrol, not expecting to discover the lifeless body of a young woman. The discovery occurred near an abandoned fishing camp, a remote location about 20 miles from the university. Overcoming the initial shock, the police officer was able to gather some general information about the victim. This experience marked a significant turning point in his career. Ally's purse, containing her school ID and driver's license, was found nearby shortly afterward. When the police department was notified, investigators began their efforts to uncover what had happened. They attempted to trace Ally's cell phone but were unsuccessful. Meanwhile, that Saturday, Brandon spent the day with friends, behaving as if it were any other day, showing no apparent signs of distress. They went bowling and chatted normally, with none of his friends noticing anything unusual. At some point between Saturday and Sunday, Brandon wrote a letter to his parents, revealing his anguish over his actions. Though he avoided explicitly mentioning the crime, he confessed to something terrible that would likely result in his imprisonment or death. He was certain that sooner or later, the police would catch him. As investigators delved into Ally's social circle, Brandon emerged as a potential suspect. The team focused their efforts on trying to contact him, but all calls to his cell phone went unanswered. On Saturday afternoon, the police visited Ally's family to deliver the devastating news. The words hung in the air, creating a surreal sense that they were living a nightmare. Overwhelmed with grief, Cindy and Keith had to face an unimaginable reality. Ally's close friend, Maddie, struggled to make sense of what had happened. Her mind flooded with memories of the time spent with the friend she considered a sister. Meanwhile, the police continued their attempts to reach Brandon. By then, he had left his friend's house and was driving his truck. Ally's cell phone remained missing. The news of the crime shocked the university community and local residents. However, due to the ongoing investigation, the police withheld further details. As a result, It was unclear whether the attacker had killed Ally at the lake or abandoned her there afterward. The same confusion surrounded the murder weapon and the connection between the victim and the perpetrator. This changed when investigators made a crucial discovery. In Ally's room, they found her smartwatch, which turned out to be an invaluable piece of evidence. The smartwatch allowed them to uncover some of the text messages exchanged between Ally and Brandon. Realizing the urgency, the team immediately tried to contact Brandon, who this time answered their call. He apologized for not responding earlier and made excuses to avoid meeting with the officers but promised to come to the police department first thing on Monday, July 22nd. After hanging up, fully aware of his predicament, Brandon continued to travel as far as possible. On Sunday, July 21st, 2019, he arrived at another friend's house carrying an unusual item, a firearm. He made no effort to hide it and even unloaded it in front of his host. Brandon also brought a six-pack of beer, so they sat down to drink, chat, and watch television. The next morning, he left without attending the scheduled meeting at the police department, thus becoming a fugitive. Detectives obtained an arrest warrant and began tracking Brandon's phone. Having left Mississippi, Brandon's location was soon identified as Memphis, Tennessee. Authorities issued an alert for his truck, which had a distinctive license plate. It didn't take long for the Memphis Fugitive Task Force to get a positive result. About an hour and a half later, the prime suspect, wearing a blood-stained shirt, was apprehended outside a gas station in the southwest part of the state. The operation involved at least 12 officers and 7 police patrols. Inside the vehicle, they found a firearm matching the one used in Ally's murder. Mississippi investigators were promptly notified. They headed north to pick up Brandon. Upon arrival, they found Brandon calm. They read him his rights and then transported the suspect back to Mississippi in custody. Once they reached the station, Brandon recounted his activities during the weekend of the crime, revealing that he had been roaming around Oxford from Friday to Saturday. Beyond that information, Brandon remained steadfast in his right to remain silent, refusing to provide further details to the investigators. He was detained at the county jail, and his family soon hired an attorney to handle his defense. In a statement, Brandon's father insisted that his son was not involved in the incident. He urged everyone to presume Brandon's innocence, confident that the ongoing investigation would reveal what he believed to be the truth. However, he was unprepared for what was to come. The first blow came when a university spokesperson confirmed that Brandon was suspended from the institution. Meanwhile, Ally's autopsy revealed that she was not pregnant at the time of her death, but this information was not shared with the media. Ally's funeral took place on Saturday, July 27, 2019. Friends, family, and community members left flowers and condolence notes. Despite their indescribable grief, they felt fortunate to have known such a vibrant and luminous young woman. In August of that year, Brandon was charged with first-degree murder. If found guilty, he could face the death penalty. His name made headlines. When Rex heard the news, he was initially shocked, but soon, everything seemed to make sense. He recalled all the rude and contemptuous comments Brandon had made about various women. For the prosecutors, the case became a textbook example of ignored warning signs in relationships that can lead to tragic endings. They believed that Ally's death could have been prevented. As the search for evidence continued, investigators discovered the letter Brandon had written during that weekend while searching his apartment. The COVID-19 pandemic delayed the start of the judicial process, requiring extra patience from Ally's friends and family. However, the investigators used this time to continue their work, sifting through hundreds of text messages between Ally and Brandon, a daunting task. Meanwhile, the prosecutors continued to build their case, gradually uncovering the details of an unequal love story. A series of facts, previously unknown to those close to the university student, came to light. When the case was finally presented to a grand jury in mid-2021, the evidence included photographs of the gun and bullet casings, as well as the letter. To the prosecutors, this letter was clearly a confession. However, the defense presented a completely different perspective. As Brandon pleaded not guilty, his lawyer argued that the letter was merely a farewell note, as Brandon had contemplated taking his own life at that time. To support this claim, the defense mentioned that Brandon himself had stated he was holding the gun to his head when he suddenly fainted. It was during this moment that the courtroom learned from Ally's autopsy report that she was not pregnant and had no evidence of ever having been pregnant. The revelation caused an unmistakable shock. The trial proceeded until unexpectedly, in August 2021, just a week before the sentencing, Brandon chose to admit his responsibility for the crime. He and his legal team reached a plea agreement with the prosecution to avoid the death penalty. Instead, he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing hearing, Brandon addressed Ally's family, apologizing for the immense pain he caused by taking their daughter's life. He acknowledged that his actions had permanently altered the lives of the Kostel family and his own. He expressed a desire to turn back time and undo his actions, but knowing that was impossible, he sought forgiveness from God and hoped that one day they might find it in their hearts to forgive him. Following Brandon's statement, the victim impact statement was read aloud in court, delivered by Cindy, Ally's mother. In her letter, she expressed regret for not being able to keep her daughter away from Brandon, whom she described in stark terms as a monstrous, heartless, scheming, ungrateful, sinister, violent, and corrupt individual. Cindy also added that Brandon had every opportunity to do good in the world but chose to do evil. Because of that choice, he would spend every day of the rest of his life in prison. She reminded everyone that it was an atrocious act he committed against a sweet soul like Ally, and predicted that every time the cell doors slammed shut, it would be a reminder of what he did and the life he took. Those who knew Ally hold on to the certainty that the actions of her attacker will never extinguish the sweet light she brought into the world. On the contrary, they know that her spirit will live on through the lives she touched, as Ally always strived to make the world a better place with every step she took. This story is about a woman whose life is filled with lies from beginning to end. You will learn how the unscrupulous deceiver ends up in pursuit of big money and how many human destinies it can affect. Michelle grew up in the town of Hearst in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas. She had a younger sister, Laura. The girl's mother left home in search of a better life, so the upbringing of children was the father. It was not easy for a man to raise two daughters alone. He survived on occasional earnings at a construction site and often relied on alcohol. In search of easy money, he repeatedly thought up and implemented devious plans for profit. He would take a job at one factory or another and deliberately injure himself in order to obtain insurance money compensation. The fraud scheme worked, but not for long. With the help of CCTV cameras at one of the workplaces, the scheme was uncovered and Michelle and Laura's father was sent into custody. Michelle grew up in a world of lies, deceit, and manipulation from childhood. This was her normal life, from which she wanted to escape by any means possible. But it is impossible to escape from herself, because lies have already become a part of her life, and she simply did not know how to live differently. The girl dreams of growing up faster to get out of the hated poverty. At the age of 15, Michelle looks very spectacular, a petite brunette of athletic build. She attracts a lot of interest from guys both of her own and older age. Even then, Michelle realizes that with the help of her feminine power and charm, she can easily manage to manipulate any men in her environment in order to get what she wants. So in her life begins a series of love relationships with different men. At the age of 17, Michelle drops out of school and marries for the first time to 16-year-old Kenneth O'Brien. She informs the boyfriend that she is expecting a baby. Kenneth, taking full responsibility for his young wife and future child, enlists in the army. The couple moves frequently. 2 more children are born to them in this marriage. One city is replaced by another. Temporary housing of the military was not the limit of Michelle's dreams. Such a life does not suit her, and after 5 years, she leaves, naming the reason for divorce beatings and cheating on the part of her husband. Michelle returns to her native Hearst. In front of relatives and friends, she appears as a victim of domestic violence and receives the necessary support and begins to organize her life anew. After a while, she falls in love with her former classmate, Brandon. The young man is head over heels in love with Michelle and gladly accepted her 3 children. The lovers prepare for the wedding. However, on the eve of the wedding, Michelle infuriates Brandon. It turns out that the girl did not divorce her first husband. She was very afraid to talk to him about divorce because of the abuse, so she did not send the documents. With the help of a lawyer, this issue was quickly settled and the couple was able to marry in 1994. At first, family life flowed calmly and measured. Brandon was engaged in the development of his IT company and Michelle worked as a dental assistant. But quiet family life was not the limit of Michelle's dreams. She has always needed more. She starts bringing home all sorts of dental equipment and supplies. The cash doesn't fit in her purse. Brandon suspected something wrong. Eventually, Michelle was caught stealing. It was only by luck that a trial was avoided. But Brandon's trust issues with his wife were just beginning. Responding to neighbors' reports that cars were frequently arriving at the house while he was at work, Brandon installed a tape recorder in several rooms of the house. Listening to the tape, he heard various men visiting their home throughout the day. Brandon does his own little investigation and learns that the reason for the divorce in Michelle's first marriage was her numerous infidelities, not her husband's beatings, as she told everyone. Brandon's patience broke, and he demanded a divorce. Michelle was furious that Brandon initiated the divorce, and while he was at work, she got back at him. "I had a very nice saltwater aquarium with thousands of dollars worth of fish in it," Brandon says. "She poured comat into it and killed all the fish." But Michelle didn't stop there. Brandon also had a beloved dog named Domino. Michelle stuffed the dog with sleeping pills, which led to the death of the living creature. Michelle put Domino to sleep. "If you're shocked at this point, we've only scratched the surface," Brandon says. "It was a nightmare that wouldn't stop. You can't make that girl go away." Unfortunately, Brandon learned the truth about Michelle. When his own marriage was completely destroyed, everything Michelle did with Brandon Dixon pales in comparison to her adventures with other men. It was later revealed that John Paul Ray, also a student at the high school Michelle attended in Hearst, was the father of her first child. Instead of revealing this information to John, she told Kenneth O'Brien that the child was his, forcing him to marry her. Kenneth, for 13 years, thought the eldest son was his own. John later told police that Kenneth paid child support from age 5 to 18 and did not know he was not the father. After Brandon and Michelle divorced, she moved in with John, the father of her first child. They lived in a common-law marriage for 8 years. Their relationship came to an abrupt end when John began to suspect his wife of cheating. Michelle didn't deny it. She confirmed the affair on the side. John moved out, leaving most of Michelle's possessions. Michelle's next love was Greg Williams. They were both not so young anymore. Both had a history of past marital failures. The man was married twice and had a daughter. After Greg and Katie divorced in 2003, the couple agreed to share custody of their common daughter, Taylor. However, there was no formal agreement on child support because the former spouses had a good relationship. Rich, successful, and generous Greg was a perfect match for Michelle. And Greg and Michelle had a common daughter, Michaela. A year later, they got married. Their marriage was like the American dream. Money, children, love, it was all in abundance. Michelle seemed to have made it through the thorns to the stars and got the life she had always dreamed of. Greg Williams held his family in very high esteem. He grew up in a family with fierce principles and achieved everything on his own from an early age. He loved sports and was a martial arts black belt. In addition to his love of exercise, Greg was also a fan of guns. Both he and Michelle had guns that they kept in their home in Keller. Michelle's gun, a silver .40 caliber pistol, was kept in a safe. But Greg kept his gun, a black Luber .45 caliber, always loaded in a case under his bedside table. The couple was determined to make their marriage a success. They threw birthday parties for their children from other marriages at their home in Keller. Michelle's adult children would have barbecues and swim parties. Very often the house was full of friends. But despite the picturesque suburban home and a precocious daughter, Greg and Michelle were not the classic American couple. They met through an online community for bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism, and their wild adult house parties led to numerous complaints from neighbors. Without making the matter public, couple decides to move out. The night before, Michelle and Greg had been unable to sleep for a long time. They were preparing to buy a new house for $4.5 million. They emotionally discussed the upcoming event. Greg stayed in the bedroom alone. Michelle went out to her crying daughter and fell asleep with her in the room. On October 13, 2011, at 4:40 a.m., an emergency call came in. Crying woman screamed into the phone that she and her husband had been attacked by a robber. She was injured and her husband had been shot. Within minutes, police arrived at the scene of the tragedy. Inside the home, detectives found a television on full volume and a baby sleeping on the couch. Michelle's daughter was sound asleep and unaffected in any way by the attack that occurred. The woman's behavior alerted police officers. She was behaving rather strangely and did not look like she had just experienced a burglary. Soon, the gated community was filled with police cars, detectives, and forensic experts. The lot was cordoned off, and police searched every inch of the nearly 5,000 square foot home. Michelle was fully dressed, had her hair styled, and was acting very calm. She told police she was asleep, but her clothing and demeanor said otherwise. As the only witness, Michelle was taken to the Keller Township Police Station for questioning. After several hours of talking to police and investigators, Michelle's story began to fall apart like a house of cards. According to the woman, the intruder dressed in all black hit her on the head with a wrench. She fell from the blow, but was conscious and heard a gunshot. The stranger then fled through the back door of the house. Michelle Williams' account did not match what police saw at the scene. Greg Williams was shot in the head while lying in bed. A .45 caliber handgun, presumably used by the intruder, was found near the back door next to a wrench. There were no fingerprints on either weapon. Neither was found to show any signs of forced entry. The family's valuables and money were untouched. Examined CCTV footage from a neighbor's camera showed that only one car had entered the gated community in the hours before the crime. Police confirmed that the car belonged to a newspaper delivery man. To confuse the investigation, Michelle came up with a version of the attack. She hit herself with a wrench and made their large house look like the scene of the attack. But detectives did their due diligence and noticed a number of details that didn't add up. Michelle Williams was fully dressed. Her hair was styled, and she had fresh makeup on her face. It gave the impression as if she was waiting for someone. The gun used during the crime was found in the house without any fingerprints. And the final detail that proved Michelle's lie was the $20,000 in cash that was not stolen in the robbery. Michelle had no explanation for why a successful businessman and devoted father decided to take his own life. But she was able to explain her behavior. Michelle claimed she wanted to spare their young daughter the bitter truth about her father's self-inflicted death. She admitted to police that she wiped down the gun and washed Greg's hands to cover up fingerprints, before desperately staging a home invasion and calling emergency services. As bizarre as that explanation was, it became obvious to police why no evidence was found in the house. Michelle admitted to wiping the crime scene with bleach and hitting herself in the face with a wrench to present a more realistic picture of the attack. From the beginning, Keller police doubted the credibility of Michelle's testimony. But at the time, no physical evidence was presented linking her to the crime. Michelle was arrested for perjury, but was soon released home. Around 5 p.m. on the evening of her husband's murder, Michelle went to her sister Laura's home and did not mention the late Greg's name once during the evening. Michelle cried from time to time, but it didn't seem sincere, her sister Laura Cusick said when questioned by police. The morning after the tragedy, Michelle woke up in a great mood. She was beautifully dressed, with her hair styled and makeup on. In high spirits, the recent widow went for breakfast at a famous restaurant that served the best pancakes with syrup. While the police were looking into the theory that Greg had taken his own life, struggling to find a motive and obtain credible evidence of it, Michelle herself presented the investigation with first a motive and then evidence of her guilt. Going through the documents from the first interrogation, the investigators were attracted by Michelle's words that she didn't care about a single penny, but her actions proved otherwise. After Greg's death, quickly begins liquidating assets from family companies and spending large sums of money. She cashes checks through Greg's IT company. The amount of checks cashed is not disclosed anywhere. In all likelihood, we are talking about a lot of money. After receiving cash from the sale of the Blueberries frozen yogurt store in Keller, Michelle made one of her biggest blunders. She went to the insurance company hoping to get a payout on Greg's life insurance policy. Michelle was the sole beneficiary on Greg's life insurance policy, which was taken out on August 12, 2011, almost exactly 2 months before he was killed. But one important fact the woman missed: according to the terms of the insurance policy, Greg's death was not an insured event because he left his life voluntarily, and at the last moment she was denied the money. The desire to get the insured sum of $600,000 was the main motive for the crime. Later, another important fact of financial fraud comes to light that casts suspicion on the widow. Fictitious financial documents for a mortgage loan were used to purchase the house that Greg and Michelle had been preparing for on the eve of his death. The account numbers were intentionally changed, and the lender did not immediately notice the elaborate fraud. When Greg died, Michelle canceled a meeting with the mortgage company, and the fake account was not discussed until it caught the attention of the police. Michelle, confident of her impunity, writes a check for $18,000 to attorney Kenneth Wincorn and takes a week-long vacation to Grapevine with her children. During the 3-month investigation into Greg Williams' death, police were able to unravel his wife's web of deceit. An autopsy was performed on Greg, which proves that the man was shot from a range of 12 to 18 inches. Moreover, the toxicology examination conducted provided a report proving that Greg had a large dose of sleeping pills in his system at the time of his death. Also, the police determined that there was no assault on the house. Mrs. Williams sedated her husband and shot him from a foot away after turning up the volume on the television. Daughter Michelle, who was asleep in her room, did not hear anything. On November 3, 2011, based on the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's report, Greg Williams' death was officially ruled a homicide. Michelle Williams was arrested on January 9th as she was on her way to a fitness center. She was charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and making a false statement to police. Michelle was both the only witness to the crime and the only suspect. Bail was set at $522,000 to be released from custody pending a court hearing. But Michelle spent a week in custody and was released on $85,000. Dressed in gym clothes, Michelle walked out of jail with a GPS monitor and under the arm of attorney Kenneth Wincorn, who was now officially representing her. Greg's first wife, Kathy, was furious when she found out that attorney Wincorn was defending Michelle. That money she paid him was part of Greg's estate, and it should never have gone to pay the legal bills of the woman who was accused of killing him. Online court records list Kenneth Wincorn as the attorney for Katie and Greg's divorce in 2003, and Wincorn's name and signature appear on legal documents regarding the custody agreement for their shared daughter Taylor in 2008. However, Kenneth Wincorn's defense of collusion with Michelle Williams will be exonerated by providing evidence. The divorce was handled by his company, and he personally never represented Greg. Kenneth Wincorn said he first learned of Greg's murder from an IT company employee. It was very shocking, Wincorn says, adding that Michelle later sought his help. After her plot to cash in on Greg's death is foiled, Michelle Williams changes her name to Shelley and appears as a fitness guru hoping to start a new life. On Facebook, Shelley publicly announced her relationship with Gene Wallace, a friend of her oldest son, a man nearly 15 years younger than her. Shelley and Gene opened a fitness club in Bedford and heavily promoted it online. Armed with an ankle bracelet with a GPS tracker, Michelle spent the next few months enjoying her new boyfriend, fitness classes, and court hearings. She often appeared in court dressed for a night out on the town, wearing mini-skirts, knee-length boots, and deep-cut blouses. She never mourned Greg's death for a second, says Greg's ex-wife, Kathy. Rob Conover was friends with Greg Williams for more than 20 years and attended many of Michelle's hearings. He recalls how she deftly manipulated police officers at the courthouse, making them see her as an innocent woman in need of protection. On October 9, 2013, 45-year-old Michelle Williams took a plea deal with the county and pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence and deadly conduct. She will receive 18 years in prison for tampering with evidence and for deadly dangerous conduct, a third-degree felony that only exists in a few states. Although Michelle admitted that she cleaned the gun and Greg's body, the absence of her DNA at the scene raised doubts about whether the first-degree murder charge would stick. Things can go differently. Play big, win big, or lose big, Michelle said in an interview. With the plea bargain, I expect to do a couple years. And after that, I'll be out on parole. But in February 2014, Michelle Williams, in an interview, suddenly changes her testimony and says she is not guilty of the crime. The judge immediately rescinds the plea bargain and sets a date for the first trial. Opening arguments have begun in the trial of a Texas woman dubbed by the media as Keller's Black Widow, who was accused of intentionally targeting her husband in 2011 for an insurance payoff. Michelle Williams, 45, was charged with the crime. In court, prosecutors described the crime as a clearly planned scheme of acts to profit from Greg's substantial life insurance policy. In their opening statement, prosecutors told jurors that Mrs. Williams shot her husband in the head after drugging him with sleeping pills beforehand in order to collect on his life insurance policy. The motive was money, time-tested money, greed. Assistant District Attorney Jack Strickland said in court. Although Michelle admitted that she cleaned the gun and Greg's body, the absence of her DNA at the scene raised doubts about whether the first-degree murder charge would stick. In response to an interview request, Michelle's attorney released a statement on her behalf. Attorney Kenneth Wincorn described the difficulties in the case caused by the spotlessly clean crime scene. The prosecution struggled to prove a premeditated crime, disregarding the fact that there was no DNA from the suspect. In repeated searches, cleaning products were found, but it stands to reason that Michelle's fingerprints were on them, since the products were in the house where she lived and did the cleaning. If the jury concludes that Michelle tampered with evidence of Greg's death, making it look like the man had spontaneously passed away and then cleaned up the crime scene by hiding evidence and then lying about it, she will get a life sentence. But if Michelle is sentenced as scheduled on April 21st, no jury will ever get a chance to hear the whole story and decide on the appropriate punishment. Through careful questioning of the Williams couple's friends and acquaintances, information regularly emerged about the unfavorable environment that had prevailed in their family for a long period of time. According to the studied correspondence in social networks and messengers, it was found that the couple quarreled very often, and the reason was finances. At the trial, prosecutors said that in the hours leading up to the violent death, Greg Williams argued with his wife over their finances and even slapped her for spending a large amount of money that had been set aside as a down payment on a house. But Michelle Williams' defense argued that Greg Williams had taken his own life and that the successful business owner needed his wife alive, not dead. According to defense attorney Clay Graham, Greg Williams often suffered from depression and regularly used sedatives and steroids. On the eve of the crime, he was allegedly severely depressed due to the loss of his grandmother and best friend, who ironically had taken his own life. Defense counsel told the court that when Michelle Williams found her husband dead with a self-inflicted gunshot wound, she panicked and in a fit of fear began to cover up the tragedy without realizing it. She had one goal: to protect her 4-year-old daughter from psychological trauma by hiding the truth from her. Michelle Williams never once changed herself, presenting at court hearings in different images with styled hair and manicure. At one hearing, the defendant, dressed in an off-white blouse and black vest, showed little emotion throughout most of the trial, but did not forget to wipe away tears during a presentation of photographs showing images of the body of murdered Greg Williams. The court also heard testimony from Michelle Williams' adult son, Andrew O'Brien, who said his mother Michelle Williams asked him to help frame Greg Williams' ex-wife, Kathy. She planned to blame her for Greg's death using the motive of unreconciled differences over the custody of their daughter, Taylor. But that plan was a failure from the get-go. After all, there was never any disagreement between the former spouses about the custody of their daughter, and it would have been very difficult to prove otherwise. Asked about his reaction to his mother's unusual request, 26-year-old Andrew O'Brien said he was very shocked by such a proposal and thought she was having a mental breakdown. Michelle confronted her sons at the trial when they testified against her. The jury later found Michelle guilty of felony tampering with physical evidence. According to the show, she provided false information that she was pregnant with twins, hoping to delay her sentencing. But this version was not confirmed, and the verdict was announced. Michelle's acting abilities and her natural charm, which she tried her best to demonstrate during each hearing, did not spare her from a harsh sentence. Sandwiched between a scenario in which she was a cold-blooded criminal and one in which she was portrayed as a deranged wife and mother acting on impulse, Michelle chose the latter. "He did it," she said, wrapping her arms around her head. Michelle even congratulated the detective on solving the case. "I wouldn't have gotten through the day," she said. "You've won." Even before the police admitted to doubting Michelle's story, few believed Greg had lost his life. He had too much to live for, and he knew all too well how much pain an untimely death causes. Kathy Williams believes that Michelle's relationship with Gene Wallace began when Greg was still alive and may be the elusive motive for this crime. If Greg had found out she was sleeping with her little boyfriend, he would have dumped her, and she would have gotten nothing. Katie says Greg was willing to put up with a lot, but he wasn't willing to put up with cheating. "She's ruined so many lives you can't even imagine," Brandon says. "She's a professional manipulator. If the courts had gone further and interviewed all of us, things could have gone in a different direction." Michelle was sentenced to 60 years in prison. The judge also ruled that she would have to serve a minimum of 30 years before being eligible for parole. Michelle currently remains incarcerated at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, Texas. Michelle Williams is a felon and fraudster who is currently serving time in prison for all of her willful acts. She has never shown remorse for her actions and still refuses to take full responsibility for her crime. Rudolph Farias, known to everyone as Rudy, was born in Houston, Texas. He lived with his mother, Janie Santana, and his older brother, Charles, who was from Janie's previous relationship. Janie had been married to another man for 10 years. Rudy's father, also named Rudolph Farias, was a veteran officer from the Houston police who remained distant, having another family with 5 more children. For Rudy, his older brother was a crucial figure in his upbringing. Rudy once shared on Facebook how important Charles was to him. He recounted how, during his time at school, he was often teased for being small and skinny. But whenever things got tough, Charles would step in to defend and protect him. Charles was more than just a brother. He was Rudy's best friend and father figure. However, Rudy sometimes felt a tinge of jealousy because Charles had a good relationship with his father, who often visited and took Charles out, bringing back cool toys or Happy Meal surprises from McDonald's. According to Rudy, Charles noticed his sadness and one day talked to him, acknowledging Rudy's hurt over not seeing his father. Charles promised he would always be there for Rudy and never abandon him. The brothers grew up inseparable, relying on each other under the strict and unstable supervision of their mother, Janie. To explain Janie's instability, judicial records show she had used at least 5 different surnames over the years, including Diaz, Rodriguez, Farias, and Ortega. The records also indicate that Janie had been married several times, with at least one marriage annulled because one of her ex-partners claimed she was married to 2 other people simultaneously. She also had a history of minor criminal offenses, such as public disorder on November 22, 1994, inappropriate conduct with a loaded firearm in 1996, and driving without a license with a minor, presumed to be Rudy, in 2020. Additionally, she had been arrested for speeding and driving under the influence. Janie also created social media accounts on platforms like TikTok and Facebook using photos that were not hers. According to different sources, Janie once stole pictures of a country singer to use on a fake profile. Despite the tumultuous household, there was always pride for the eldest son, Charles. He benefited from his father's financial support, but remained humble and down to earth. Charles was an excellent brother, son, and student. He graduated from high school in 2007 and was accepted into the U.S. Marine Corps, with training set to begin on March 21, 2011. At 21, Charles dreamed of serving his country, but his life was tragically cut short in a motorcycle accident on February 13, 2011. Charles's sudden and tragic death profoundly impacted the family. Rudy, who was 13 at the time, expressed his grief on Facebook, detailing the events of that fateful day. He recounted how they woke up together that morning, and Charles asked Rudy to help him get the motorcycle out of the garage. After preparing, Charles left to meet friends, marking the last time Rudy saw his brother alive. A family friend called later that day to inform them that Charles had been in an accident and his body was lying on the pavement. Rudy and Janie rushed to the scene. Rudy recalled that at first he couldn't see his brother. Then he saw his mother on the ground, holding Charles and pleading with God to bring her son back. Rudy described how he froze, staring at his brother lifeless on the ground. This state of shock stayed with him for a long time. He told his loved ones that he found it difficult to even say the word death. He preferred to think that his brother had fallen asleep forever and often said he would soon meet Charles in heaven. At Charles's military funeral, Rudy delivered an emotional speech expressing how much he would miss his brother, who was the closest thing he had to a father. He shared that Charles taught him many things, but not how to live without him. The following years were tough for Janie and Rudy. The void left by Charles was a heavy burden to bear. Rudy began experiencing recurrent episodes of post-traumatic stress and depression. He even started self-harming, scratching his wrists with sharp objects like aluminum cans. On August 19, 2014, 3 years after his brother's death, Rudy received news that his father, aged 51, had also died tragically. The lifeless body of Rudy's father was found in his uniform inside his patrol car. He had parked in a secluded area outside Houston, where he decided to take his own life using his service weapon. The police report on the incident revealed that shortly before, he had been relieved of his duties pending an internal affairs investigation. Rudolph had been with the Houston Police Department since May 1993. A police spokesperson detailed that Rudolph was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation into criminal conduct allegations. The suspension meant he had no police duties and was assigned closely supervised desk work with little to no public contact. It is noteworthy that Rudolph was one of 4 officers under investigation for manipulating speeding tickets issued by the Houston Police Department's Traffic Enforcement Unit. There were instances, for example, of tickets being issued at the same time in different locations hundreds of miles apart. There were also questionable tickets issued late at night. Police sources explained that the motive behind these irregularities was to commit fraud to earn overtime pay. Records show that Rudolph earned $158,000 in overtime since 2012. Although Rudolph was an absent figure, his death affected Rudy, who once again expressed his feelings on Facebook. He thanked those who sent condolences for his father, even though he had never known him. Rudy acknowledged feeling pain because his father's death permanently closed any possibility of a father-son relationship. He confessed that he never expected to feel anything for his father, but in the end, he experienced pain, sadness, lethargy, and other confusing emotions. Amid the emotional turmoil, on March 6, 2015, Rudy left his house around 6 p.m. to walk his 2 dogs in northwest Houston. A few hours later, one of the dogs returned home. The second dog came back the next morning, according to a police report. On March 7, 2015, Rudy's mother reported him missing. A missing persons flyer from that year noted that Rudy had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety, and that he might have stopped taking his prescribed medication. The flyer described Rudy as having suffered a leg injury that caused a slight limp. Rudy's cousin told the New York Post that although Rudy was 17, his mental age was around 10. Some of Rudy's family speculated that he might have been kidnapped and sold into a human trafficking ring. 2 years after his disappearance in May 2017, authorities put up a billboard in North Houston to draw attention from local residents in hopes that someone might provide clues to find him. On March 22, 2015, a GoFundMe campaign was launched to help Janie in her search for her son, Rudy. At the time, she claimed Rudy had physical and mental disabilities. The campaign raised $2,025. In 2017, Janie told a news channel that detectives had informed her Rudy might have been kidnapped and sold to human traffickers. However, the case grew more perplexing as sightings of Rudy were reported between 2018 and 2022. In 2018, another of Rudy's cousins called Houston police, saying she had seen Rudy at Janie's house. However, when officers arrived, they found no sign of him. She also mentioned that her grandmother often said she talked to Rudy, but as she was elderly, her claims were not taken seriously. The grandmother insisted that Rudy walked around the house. During a 2020 dispute over the grandmother's guardianship, Janie's sisters accused her of forcing their mother to live in a poorly maintained house. They wanted to move the elderly woman to another home because the current one was so run down that she slept on the couch as there was no bed. Additionally, the sisters alleged that the house was filled with animal urine and feces, causing the grandmother to suffer from skin infections. Despite Janie's denials, the grandmother continued to tell the family she saw and spoke to Rudy. Around the same time, neighbors began reporting seeing a young man resembling Rudy entering and leaving Janie's house. A detective from the Houston Police Department's Missing Persons Unit said that when Janie was questioned about the young man visiting her house, she claimed he was her nephew, not her son. On June 29, 2023, around 10 p.m., a person found Rudy severely injured outside a church in southeast Houston. The young man had bruises all over his body, especially on his face. On July 3, 2023, Janie issued a statement thanking the media and the public for their support over the years. She announced that her son, Rudy, had been found after being missing for 8 years. Janie mentioned that she had no additional information at that moment, but confirmed that Rudy was found unconscious and that the police and 911 were immediately notified. She assured everyone that Rudy was receiving the necessary care to overcome his trauma, but noted that he could not communicate verbally and requested privacy during this difficult time. Adding to the dramatic turn of events, Janie mentioned that Rudy was found clutching the chain his brother Charles used to wear around his neck. She later shared a photo of Rudy in a hospital bed. Rudy's aunts, however, disputed the authenticity of the photo, stating it was taken in 2012. On July 5, 2023, Rudy and his mother met with detectives from the Houston Police Department's Missing Persons Unit at a hotel. They were joined by Quinnell X, a prominent activist and advisor for the local Black Panther movement. After the meeting, Quinnell X told the media that Rudy had confided in him about experiencing oppressive practices and significant suffering over the past 8 years. He suggested that Janie should be investigated and possibly detained as Rudy, now 25, had endured uncomfortable situations implying a degree of intimacy, but did not label them as sexual in nature. Quinnell X informed the press that Rudy had been found outside the church because he had taken his mother's car to escape, but ended up crashing it. He also mentioned that Rudy had been visiting neighbors under an alias. Following the press conference, Quinnell X retracted his statements in an interview with The Independent, accusing the police of attempting a cover-up. He recommended providing Rudy with medical and psychological help. A video of Janie in front of her house surfaced on social media, where she expressed that she expected to be arrested. The video was recorded by local residents. On July 6, 2023, the police held their first press conference since Rudy was found. They confirmed that Rudy had returned home the day after being reported missing in 2015 and that his mother had misled the police by continuing to claim he was missing, asserting that the person seen by friends and family around the house was a nephew. The police explained that the district attorney had declined to press charges at that time since being missing is not a crime. That same day, Rudy's aunt reported that she had met with her nephew. She stated that Rudy was traumatized, did not want to be near his mother, and was staying with family friends. She called her sister Janie a pathological liar who had mistreated their mother, who had since passed away. She recalled how their late mother always insisted that Rudy was living in the house, only to be dismissed as lying by Janie. Learning that Rudy had been alive and controlled by his mother for 8 years, his cousin told a reporter that she felt more concerned than relief. She found it disturbing that Janie had lied and hidden her adult son for 8 years for reasons that remained unclear. As more details of the case emerged, reporters found Janie's address and started arriving in her neighborhood. Janie became nervous and began offering money to residents, asking them to stay silent and not reveal that they had seen a young man entering and leaving the house when detectives and journalists arrived. Disturbed neighbors pointed out that the young man they now identify as Rudy had always been known to them as Dolph, Janie's nephew. Amid the media frenzy and the community's astonishment at the bizarre case, Janie's whereabouts remain unknown as she appears to have left her family home. A news media confirmed that activists and neighbors gathered on July 7th in front of Rudy's house in East Houston, demanding a thorough investigation by the district attorney and criminal charges against Rudy's mother. On July 13th, Rudy made his first public statements after spending 8 years hidden away due to his mother's actions, attracting worldwide attention. He explained how he stayed out of sight for so long out of obedience. Rudy agreed to the on-camera interview, but asked to have his face concealed because he felt overwhelmed by the attention his case had generated. He accused his mother, Janie, of brainwashing him, clarifying that he was never physically locked up or tied down. He could come and go as he pleased, but chose not to because she convinced him the world was a hostile place and they could only survive by staying together at home. The police added that although Rudy was listed as a missing person, he and his mother interacted with officers using false names and birthdays to hide their identities. During the interview, Rudy described feeling trapped in his own home for years, likening it to living in a prison. He recounted how Janie would lock him in a room whenever family members visited. He could hear them chatting and laughing, but could not join in. Rudy shared that he eventually began to yearn for freedom to have a job, live a life, love someone, and be loved. He fought to understand his emotions. Janie manipulated him into believing he had to stay silent for his own good, bombarding him with negative thoughts that made him complicit in the charade. It was a form of mental imprisonment, Rudy explained, as he could work with his mother as a security guard and roam the neighborhood, but always under her watchful eye. Following his reappearance and contact with people who clarified the situation, Rudy said his relationship with his mother felt like Stockholm Syndrome. This psychological coping mechanism involves victims developing positive feelings towards their captor to survive. Rudy expressed that his mother had psychologically imprisoned him and wielded significant power over him as his sole parental figure since childhood, alongside his late brother. Despite answering all the reporters' questions about his false disappearance, some of Rudy's explanations still leave gaps. For instance, when asked if he ever questioned Janie about why they kept pretending he was missing, he said he did not remember. Regarding the allegations by activist Quinnell X about inappropriate advances by his mother, Rudy stated that the media had twisted his words. He mentioned occasionally sleeping with his mother but did not recall why, asserting it was not intimate though he felt uncomfortable with it. Reporters also asked if his mother had ever drugged him. Rudy recalled an incident when he was about 12 years old and she gave him a bottle of Tylenol PM or sleeping pills. According to Rudy, his mother forced him to go to the hospital, making him pretend he was sick from an overdose. He couldn't remember why she did this, but suggested it might have been because she had something to do at school. He added that around the time of his supposed disappearance, he didn't know how to handle his emotions, especially since it happened right after his brother, Charles, passed away. When asked if his mother wanted him to take on a husband-like role at home, he said yes, but only in terms of shared responsibilities like cooking and cleaning, with nothing romantic or intimate involved. Rudy told the reporters that he finally decided to leave home because he wanted to end the life he was living, where his mother kept him hidden, manipulated him, and made him believe the outside world was dangerous. When asked what message he would send to his mother if she saw the interview, Rudy replied that he wanted her to leave him alone and let him live his life and be happy. Throughout the interview, Rudy's tone was marked by anxiety and distress. In response to Rudy's shocking and unexpected revelations, his Aunt Pauline spoke to the media, expressing her deep concern for her nephew and noting that Rudy was still scared. Janie's whereabouts remain unknown, but it's possible she will face legal action from GoFundMe for benefiting from the false disappearance story. The fundraising platform stated that she had been permanently banned from GoFundMe and future beneficiary opportunities after the scam came to light. GoFundMe has a zero-tolerance policy for misuse of the platform and cooperates with police investigations into alleged misconduct. The GoFundMe campaign claimed Janie was a single mother who lost her eldest son in 2011 and Rudy's father in 2014. She needed financial help as she couldn't work due to dedicating herself to searching for her missing son. Consequently, bills were piling up and her health had deteriorated mentally, physically, and emotionally. Brenda Paradise, a private investigator who worked on the case, believes resources were misused in the search for Rudy. Brenda is part of the nonprofit organization We Help the Missing. She mentioned that volunteers searched wooded areas and made exhaustive efforts to find Rudy. She shared some of her audio notes from 2015, where Janie accused a gang of Mexicans of kidnapping her son, but this alleged group never contacted her. Brenda has not ruled out filing a lawsuit for the expenses incurred by the association during Rudy's 8-year disappearance. Rudy's case highlights the vulnerability of minors under negligent or abusive parents. In 2018, approximately 9.2 out of every 1,000 children in the United States were subjected to some form of maltreatment, according to the Children's Bureau. Neglect is the most common form of maltreatment, present in 60% of cases, as reported by the same bureau. Neglect occurs when a parent or guardian fails to meet a child's basic needs, whether medical, educational, physical, or emotional. The combination of oppression and deprivation of liberty seen in Rudy's case is common in situations involving Stockholm Syndrome within controlling relationships. One way these feelings and thoughts develop is through cognitive dissonance, which explains how and why people change their ideas and opinions to endure situations that don't seem healthy, positive, or normal. August 12, 2019 started out completely normal. Teacher's assistant, Lindsay Birbeck, was on vacation and she planned to spend the day with her family. She and her daughter, Sarah, shopping in Blackburn in the afternoon, and then they agreed to have a nice family evening over a cup of tea and meet her daughter's human boyfriend. They said goodbye and Lindsay returned home to change and go for her daily to the woods. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, she left the house and never came back. Let's delve into this sudden disappearance and try to figure out why this particular day tragedy happened and who was to blame. The events are set in the town of Blackburn in the county of Lancashire in northwest England. The town is located in the southern part of the county on the Blackburn River by the Leeds-Liverpool Canal at the junction of 4 roads and near rich coal mines. Blackburn is renowned for its natural environment and has 4 huge boated parks. Lindsay separated from her husband, Tim Birbeck, in July 2018, but they continued to live together in Upton until March 2019. She then moved to her new home on Burnley Road in Honcote. Lindsay kept her for her 2 adult children, Thivan 20 and Sarah 17. She worked as an upper-grade teacher's aide at Attenhill Elementary School in Burnley and loved being surrounded by children. Lindsay was a talented artist who could go the extra mile to create the most amazing props for school productions and plays. On the fateful day of August 12th, she went for a walk in a wooded area known as Kappas near her home in the village of Hancote on the outskirts of Accrington, and disappeared. At the appointed time, Sarah and her boyfriend Brandon arrived at Lindsay's home, but no one answered the door. Sarah became worried, as it was out of character for her mother to forget a scheduled tea party. She tried several times to contact Lindsay, but no one answered the phone. Sarah then sent her a text message that read, "Where are you? We sat outside for an hour and called 6 times. After receiving no response, Sarah sent another text message with a series of question marks, but again received no response. After waiting outside Lindsay's house for an hour, Sarah called her father, Tim Birbeck, to let him know her mom wasn't home and wasn't answering her phone. Tim took a frightened Sarah and Brandon back to his house. Near midnight, Sarah and Tim headed to Lindsay's house again, but with a set of spare keys. To their dismay, she never showed up. Inside, the house seemed quite ordinary and showed no signs of any incident. There was no note of explanation either. At 12:11 a.m. on the night of August 13th, Tim Birbeck contacted police and told the dispatcher, "My ex-wife seems to be missing. We can't find her. It doesn't look like her." Lindsay Birbeck was reported missing. Lindsay's disappearance shook up the community. People of the small suburb banded together and went out in search of the woman. There were hundreds of people, men and women, grandparents and people walking dogs, teenagers with bicycles and even moms with strollers. To most, Lindsay was a stranger, but that didn't matter. After days of desperate searches, social media appeals and posters, people still gathered at Compass for 2 consecutive days, in the hope of finding a vital clue that could solve the mystery of Lindsay Birbeck's disappearance. After several days of fruitless searching, It was clear to everyone that the search was going to be difficult. With each passing day, the chances of finding Lindsay alive dwindled. Detectives classified Lindsay Birbeck as high risk. She had never gone missing before, and her family described the disappearance as very uncharacteristic of her. Nevertheless, the search did not stop for a moment. Locals printed thousands of posters to distribute throughout the neighborhood, while a Facebook group associated with the search quickly grew to 10,000 members. A few hours after the police appeal was posted online, the first posters with Lindsay's face on them could be seen all over the neighborhood. Within a couple of days, there wasn't a lamppost, storefront, or traffic light that didn't have a poster calling for the search for Lindsay. Police launched an investigation into the disappearance from the house as extensive searches were carried out by specialist police officers, dog handlers, Lancashire Fire and Rescue Service, mountain rescue volunteers, and the city's search and rescue team. Drones and helicopters were also deployed to search the area covering Kappas and the surrounding open countryside for a considerable distance, including popular walking and running routes. For days after Lindsay's disappearance, Lancashire police released CCTV footage showing when she was last seen alive, walking along Burnley Road at 4:10 in the afternoon towards Kappas. She was wearing a purple jacket, black leggings, and dark sneakers with white soles. A week had passed since her disappearance on August 19th, and with each passing day, there was less and less hope of finding Lindsay Birbeck alive. Police are still no closer to the whereabouts of the mother of two, but emphasized that there was no evidence that she was the victim of a criminal act, meaning there was still a chance of finding her alive. The search for Lindsay continued. That evening, hundreds of local residents took part in the first mass public search of Kappas after a rallying call was made on social media. Things moved when a local resident's dog ran into a wooded area in Akrington Cemetery. He yelled and called her name several times, but the dog didn't respond. The dog hit its head in the bushes, sniffing and trying to dig for something. The dog's owner walked over to him, stood next to him, and was horrified to find that there was something very soft under his feet. He was frightened and bounced back. Then he smelled a horrible odor and flies were swirling around. A plastic bag and something that looked like a foot were visible from the ground. On August 24th, 12 days after Lindsay Birbeck disappeared, her body was found under the most horrific circumstances buried in a cemetery. The naked body, wrapped in two clear plastic bags mixed with earth and grass, was placed across a shallow grave. The search for Lindsay Birbeck was considered complete. A murder investigation was officially launched. Pathologist Dr. Naomi Carter, after conducting an autopsy, determined that death was due to a broken neck. The trauma was inflicted with such force that the entire larynx had crushing injuries. The neck was most likely struck with a foot or knee. An attempt to cut off Lindsay's right leg after death was also determined, possibly with a saw, as time marks were found. A large laceration was found on the leg, which had been cut down to the bone. The injuries Lindsay suffered were catastrophic. Dr. Carter also reported that due to the poor condition of the body, it was quite difficult to determine the victim's injuries, but she did not rule out any sexual activity on the day of her disappearance, which could not be ascertained due to the level of decomposition of the body. Prior to the discovery of Lindsay's body, members of the public and police had searched the same area for several days without success. Community volunteers and a police dog handler reported seeing a blue wheelie garbage can abandoned in bushes nearby. However, at this stage of the investigation, no one was yet aware of the significance of the tank. Volunteers who searched the cemetery at 9 p.m. August 20th also found the same dumpster with a dark stain on the outside and thought it might be blood. After taking pictures of the dumpster, they called the police. 2 police officers arrived on the scene to inspect it and found a brown mark that they thought was dirt. The police said the dumpster looked brand new and there was no evidence at the time to link it to Lindsay's disappearance. Therefore, it was left in place. There were other important clues found in the cemetery that were not immediately accepted. For example, local resident Christine Alderson discovered a bloody cloth on the grass at the cemetery on August 18th, while she and her daughter were walking their dogs. She said the blood on the cloth was fresh and red, but thought it might have belonged to a homeless man who frequented the area. Another woman who walks dogs, Judith Bibby, reported seeing red clothing hanging on a barbed wire fence near the Cardle Hill Trail that was probably Lindsay's jacket. She also heard a voice, presumably a child's, but heard no struggle, yelling, or screaming. On August 25th, investigators revisited the crime scene and found a yellow-handled saw and a pair of green heavy-duty gloves near Lindsay's grave that had several traces of blood. The evidence was taken to forensic testing, and it came back positive. The gloves contained the perpetrator's DNA on the inside surfaces, and Lindsay's DNA was found on the outside surface of the left glove. A pair of her Skechers sneakers, which had been cut along the sole, were also found in a blue plastic bag, discarded in the cemetery. Examination of other evidence revealed that Lindsay's body was wrapped in some kind of plastic sheeting, and between the body and the sheeting was found foliage and grass that was not in the cemetery grounds. This led investigators to believe that the body had been moved from another location. That's when detectives remembered a blue trash can that had repeatedly caught the attention of volunteers. Police officers studying the CCTV footage soon made a startling discovery that left the investigation team baffled. Several images showed a young man pulling a blue wheelie garbage can in the Burley Road area. Over the next few days, a CCTV camera captured a certain guy returning to the cemetery 4 times. Thanks to that footage, a suspect emerged. The video of a young guy carrying a trash can down the street, possibly with Lindsay's body, became a sensation. The video was shown on the news with a plea for help identifying the man, and it worked. The boy was identified by shocked teachers and parents. The teen surrendered to police the same day. His name was withheld until sentencing due to his age. He was only 16 years old at the time of the crime. The boy in the videotape turned out to be local resident Rocky Marciano Price. Rocky Marciano Price lived with his parents and 5 siblings on Winnie Hill Road in Accrington. It had been the Price family home for about 3 decades. The young lad had an impressive array of mental health abnormalities. Rocky had suffered from autism, attention deficit disorder, and hyperactivity since childhood. His low IQ created additional learning and communication challenges. He attended an alternative school in Barnoldswick several days a week, and was described by teachers as a very quiet and non-speaking student. In 2015, a psychologist assessed Price as having a limited understanding of his own emotions and his own emotional well-being. He had pronounced impairments in understanding the connections between events and emotions. Another 2016 report described Price as unresponsive to strangers and in constant need of supervision and care. Timothy Bradley, who taught at the school for 18 months, said they were always looking for ways to involve him in education, but Price preferred practical things to academic subjects. Price hardly ever engaged in conversation, even when it came to a topic that interested him. Teachers described Rocky Price as quite strong physically and tough for his age. He went to the gym regularly, liked to tend to the chickens on the family farm, and loved watching movies and playing Xbox. The guy lived in his own world and wasn't always aware of his actions. So what drove him to attack Lindsay Birbeck? Nothing at all. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time when Rocky Price was hunting lonely women. He was looking for a woman to kill, and he didn't care who it was. This was a completely random murder at the hands of a stranger. On August 12, 2020, exactly 1 year after the crime, Price finally stood trial. Rocky Marciano Price was unanimously found guilty by a jury after an 8-day retrial and 4 hours of deliberation. Appearing via video link from Her Majesty's Prison, Weatherby Price, 17, did not react in any way when the judge read out the verdict. There was also no reaction from his parents in court. He pleaded guilty to helping dispose of Lindsay's body, but claimed he played no part in her death. Rocky Price claimed he was approached by a male stranger and asked to assist in the burial of the woman for a fee. In a prepared statement, he admitted moving the garbage can and burying the body, but said he had no involvement in Lindsay's death. However, a search of his home in Accrington revealed plastic bags that were identical to those at Lindsay's grave. A tracksuit and other clothing was also analyzed, and matched the one he was wearing on surveillance cameras on August 12, 16, and 17. Defense attorney Mark Fenhals told jurors that Price did a horrible and heinous act by burying the woman's body in the cemetery, but he was not her killer. Despite the abundance of evidence against him, Rocky Price pleaded not guilty to the crime, but admitted to moving Lindsay's body. After 2 days of questioning, Price through his attorney to explain his movements between Coppice, where police believe Lindsay was killed, and the cemetery where her body was found. But the prosecutor affirmatively stated that Rocky Price acted completely alone. The motive for the random attack on the 47-year-old mother of two was never revealed, as the perpetrator did not even know the victim. The judge sentenced Price to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years. He will only be released when the parole board decides he is not a danger. The judge said the attack was swift and brutal. There was no doubt the defendant sprung with the intent to kill a woman who was walking by. Just minutes before Lindsay's incident, Zoe Braithwaite had managed to get away from a hooded teenager with her hands in her pockets, walking alone on a parallel path. Her sixth sense kicked in, and the woman was instantly wary. Zoe was confused by the guy's appearance. He looked out of place for a walk in the woods for this time of year. She quickened her step and then ran away. That probably saved the woman. If it hadn't been her, it could have been someone else. And it was Lindsay. This was a premeditated attack. After missing one woman, he didn't back off his plan to attack another lone woman. His actions after the crime clearly showed that he had the ability to plan and reason. His teachers told the court that he was much better at practical tasks than academic subjects. He used this ability to hide his body. Rocky Price was found to have made 2 return trips to Coppice on the evening of August 12th. The first incident occurred at 6:55 p.m. when he was seen on CCTV cameras carrying a black rucksack. Possibly in it, he was carrying a found saw to dismember Lindsay's body. The next incident occurred at 8:28 p.m. when dog walker Anthony Dewhurst was seen pulling out an already empty garbage can. This is the same spot where his grandfather, who bears his name, and other family members are buried. Without panic or excitement, young Rocky Price, acting alone, set in motion a plan to dispose of Lindsay's body by placing it in a blue garbage can like a piece of trash, and then burying it in a shallow grave in Accrington Cemetery, wrapped in 2 plastic bags. He set in motion a plan to dispose of Lindsay's body by first hiding her in a blue wheelie garbage can and then dragging her to the cemetery. Finding a quiet and secluded spot near the railroad line, he spent over an hour burying her body before leaving the saw, gloves, and a trash can at the scene. The murder of a stranger in broad daylight, for which there is no rational explanation, is particularly horrifying to all right-thinking members of society. The random nature of the attack suggests that the accused poses a very real danger to members of the public. The stalking of another woman before he killed Lindsay Birbeck demonstrates that his crime was not caused by a sudden loss of control. 24 hours after he was found guilty of the crime, publication restrictions were finally lifted by a judge, allowing his name and picture to be made public for the first time. Rocky Marciano Price's identity was kept secret during the first and second trial. The jury was told many important details about Price, but they could not be fully disclosed because of his young age. The judge rescinded the disclosure of the restrictions after the jury unanimously found Price guilty of the crime. The defendant's mental illness cannot in any way excuse or even explain his actions. After all, it is quite obvious that he realized that it was terribly wrong to kill, but did it anyway. Although fortunately, such crimes are rare, they instill fear in society. However, the main question in this case remains unanswered. Why did the young guy needed to kill a strange woman, and for what? Only Rocky Price knows the answer, but he didn't answer it. Perhaps if it wasn't Lindsay Birbeck, it could have been someone else. Lindsay's funeral was held at St. Margaret's Church in Hampton on September 20th. More than 200 mourners gathered at the church as police stopped traffic on Manchester Road, while Lindsay's coffin with her body covered in flowers was carried into the church. Dozens of flowers from friends and family and from strangers whose hearts were touched by Lindsay's story were left at the scene. Sarah described her mom as a very optimistic and positive woman. Lindsay was making plans for the future. She was planning a trip to Glasgow with her friend Sharon. She dreamed of finding love on the Match.com dating site. Lindsay Birbeck planned a long and happy life for herself and looked forward to the future with optimism. But all those dreams were interrupted one sunny summer day. Lindsay Birbeck's family and the detectives who investigated the crime welcomed the jury's unanimous verdict, but said no court verdict could ever bring Lindsay back or spare her family and loved ones the grief of loss. In front of the courthouse after the verdict was announced, members of the defendant's family wore t-shirts that read, "Wrongfully convicted, set this boy free." The back of the t-shirts read, "The killer is still at large. Maybe Price is an aspiring maniac. He just wanted to take a man's life, to feel what it's like, to watch someone die and mutilate them. Most likely in any form, it's an absolute neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by problems with social interaction, motor, and behavioral stereotypes." In translation, the word autism means a person who has gone into himself or a person within himself. Autism is still an understudied developmental disorder that can occur due to genetic or hereditary abnormalities. The exact cause is not fully understood, but in our story, the punishment most likely fits the crime. Sony Millbrook was born on February 15, 1981 in Memphis, Tennessee, USA. She was the daughter of Christine Millbrook Bennett and had 2 sisters and 3 brothers, along with a large extended family. This close-knit environment allowed her to forge a special bond with her cousin Jenny. As she entered her teenage years, Sony became a popular student at her high school. In 1998, at just 17 years old and in the 8th grade, she met a man in his 20s named Lakeith Moody, with whom she soon began a relationship. Unfortunately, Lakeith was abusive and his violent behavior left visible marks on Sony's body. Despite their tumultuous relationship, they had 4 children together, 3 girls and a boy named after his father. In 1999, Sony's mother noticed a bruise on her daughter's chest, which Sony tearfully admitted was caused by Lakeith. One of her friends also observed injuries, but Sony refused to report him. Lakeith was controlling and often tried to isolate her from friends and family. That same year, Sony moved into an apartment in the Fraser neighborhood of Memphis. One day, the apartment management notified her of a disturbance at her home. When she arrived, she found her apartment in disarray, furniture slashed, clothes missing, television destroyed, food smeared on the walls, and personal hygiene products scattered everywhere, including down the stairs. Written on the mirror in red nail polish was the message, "Kiki loves you," Kiki being Lakeith's nickname. On October 31st, 2000, Sony, her cousin Pamela, and Lakeith were at a bar called Mirage. During their time there, Lakeith slapped Sony and threw a drink in her face. Sony and Pamela left the bar and sat in the car where, according to Pamela, Sony was shaking and trembling. She asked Pamela to take her home before Lakeith arrived. Once home, Sony secured the door with locks and chains. An hour later, Lakeith arrived, yelling and banging on the door. Pamela only managed to get Lakeith to leave when she threatened to call the police. Once Sony calmed down, her cousin left her alone at home. However, later that evening, Pamela received a call informing her that Sony was in the hospital. Somehow, Lakeith had gained entry to the house. When Sony tried to end the relationship, he retaliated by tearing her clothes and beating her on the head, face, chest, arms in between her thighs. She ended up with bruises all over her body, a loose tooth, and even lost consciousness as Lakeith Moody had choked her until she passed out. Not long after, Lakeith Moody found birth control pills in Sony's apartment and assaulted her again. The next morning, Sony called Pamela, asking for a ride to the hospital due to a miscarriage. By late 2008, at the age of 27, Sony was working at a Christian academy. She was a reliable employee who always arrived on time. Therefore, when she missed work or requested time off, it was usually for significant reasons. On one occasion, she called her employer to say she couldn't come in because her face was badly bruised, and she didn't want the children to see her like that. Leslie granted her the day off. When Sony returned a few days later, her bruises were so severe that the director allowed her to wear sunglasses inside the academy. She confided in her boss about how her boyfriend had once chased her in his car, trying to force her off the road during the pursuit. Lakeith's violence wasn't limited to Sony and their children. In April 2008, he was found parked in an SUV with a firearm, despite being prohibited from possessing one as a convicted felon. He had already served 2 years in prison for theft and another 3 for drug possession with intent to sell. Despite Sony's efforts to distance herself from him, it was nearly impossible. The situation reached a critical point on October 6, 2008. That day, Sony did not show up at the academy. At 5 p.m., her boss received a text message from Sony, stating that her boyfriend was holding her hostage in her own home and had been beating her all day. She then provided her address. The boss called the police, and 2 officers arrived at the residence. They knocked on the door, but it was locked from the inside and there was no response. They called the fire department, who broke down the door. When the officers entered, saw Lakeith jumping out of an open window at the back of the apartment. Sony stood in a hallway, crying and unable to speak due to her distressed state. Her 4 children were with her, completing a heartbreaking scene. She was covered in bruises and scratches on her face and neck. Once she calmed down, Sony explained what had happened. She and Lakeith had started arguing and he refused to let her leave the house. She informed the officers that they didn't answer the door earlier because Lakeith wouldn't allow her or the children to go near it or the windows. She mentioned that Lakeith had hurt one of their children by grabbing him and had prevented her from taking him to the hospital. Sony detailed that her boyfriend had been physically and verbally abusing her, even tying a baby blanket around her neck and choking her until she lost consciousness. During the conflict, when the police arrived, Lakeith threatened to suffocate her again, promising that next time he would make sure to kill her. The officer searched the area but could not find Lakeith. Sony left the house with her children in her car. 3 days after this incident, she applied for a restraining order against Lakeith, fearing for her life and wanting to prevent any further contact with him. However, she missed the court hearing on October 23rd, and the protection order was never granted. Nearly 6 months later, on March 10, 2009, Sony was still in contact with Lakeith. That day, he was supposed to pick up the children for a doctor's appointment, but instead he started a fight with Sony, accusing her of having a new boyfriend. The argument quickly escalated as he slapped her and pulled her hair. She managed to break free and ran out of the apartment with Lakeith yelling death threats after her. Lakeith didn't catch her, but instead grabbed their youngest child, an infant, and drove off at high speed. A police patrol, alerted to the domestic disturbance, arrived just as Lakeith was fleeing. The officers attempted to stop him, but he evaded them and escaped. By early 2010, 28-year-old Sony was studying at Southeast Tennessee Community College. Her 5th child was 9 weeks old and in such fragile health that she had to stay home to care for him. In January, Lakeith, Sony, and their children moved together into the Budget Lodge Motel in Memphis. The very day they moved in, their arguments were so loud that the motel staff had to intervene because they were disturbing other guests. Peace was elusive. Their fights were constant, annoying the neighbors and the management with the noise. On January 22nd, the hotel security guard witnessed Lakeith in a highly agitated state. He arrived at high speed in Sony's car and began shouting at her while she stood on the 2nd floor balcony with the children. In the heat of the argument, he threw a bag of groceries at her. The guard approached and told him they couldn't make so much noise or throw objects and that they needed to finish the argument inside their room. Lakeith simply told him to mind his own business. He locked the car and walked away, with the guard following him to a 3rd-floor room not registered under anyone's name. Later, the guard asked Lakeith to hand over any hotel keys he had, and to his surprise, Lakeith had keys to 3 different rooms despite not being registered as a guest. The next day, the troubled couple moved with their children to room 222. That evening, the night manager asked Lakeith to leave, and though he complied, he soon returned. The fights continued for a few more days until the same security guard, who had repeatedly warned them, asked Lakeith to leave the property for good. The receptionist tried to calm him down as he went to the parking lot, and the guard told him not to come back that night. Lakeith got into the car and drove away. On January 26th, Sony spoke with Pamela, confiding that many things were happening in her life and that she was staying at the motel. She expressed a desire to tell Pamela something important and said she would call if she left the motel or if her boyfriend left first. The next day started normally. At 7 a.m., Sony took her younger children to daycare and her eldest to school. Around 11 a.m., the housekeeping manager knocked on Sony's door, speaking to her through the window to inform her they needed to pay or leave. He returned several times that day. On one visit, around 2:30 p.m., Lacketh answered the door. The room was dark. Lacketh told the manager that his mother was on her way to bring the money. Later, the hotel security guard checked room 222 and found it empty. Children's clothes, bags, and various items were scattered on the floor and one of the beds, while the other bed was neatly made. That same day, January 27th, Sony failed to pick up her eldest daughter on time. The school secretary called Christine, the child's maternal grandmother, to come and get her. Christine tried calling Sony, but received no answer. Around 6 p.m., Christine discovered that her other grandchildren were still at daycare. Worried by the lack of response, she asked her husband to pick up the younger children from daycare while she went to the school. Convinced something was wrong, they contacted the police, who came to the house around 10:30 p.m. and filed a missing persons report. On January 28th, the housekeeping manager entered the now empty room 222 again. This time, he began cataloging and tagging the belongings left behind by the tenants who seemingly fled to avoid paying their bill. The room contained piles of clothes and a large garbage bag which were taken to the storage area. Once the room was emptied, it was cleaned and made available for new guests. The next occupants were James and Rhonda Sargent, who moved in on January 29th. The new tenants noticed a foul odor and tried to mask it with incense, but it wasn't enough. They also noticed that the previous occupants had attempted to do the same, as they found scented tissues in the tiles and ceiling vents. The smell was particularly strong when someone sat on the bed. On January 29th, officers from the Memphis Police Department's Missing Persons Unit visited the hotel to inquire about Sony's whereabouts, as it was the last place she had been seen. However, they did not enter room 222. Lakeith was found on February 2nd at around 7 p.m. inside Sony's car, parked at a shopping center. He was arrested for vehicle theft and held in police custody for 48 hours. That night, he was questioned about Sony's disappearance. He claimed the last time he saw her was on January 26th. He explained that they met around 7 a.m. in the hotel parking lot after she returned from dropping off the children at school. They went into the room, were intimate, and then went back outside. He took Sony's car keys and left the hotel. Lakeith stated that Sony planned to use her social benefits and a school loan to buy a new car, so it wasn't a problem if he kept hers. He claimed he had been living in the car since January 26th. Investigators, however, discovered that he had actually been staying at another hotel. Additionally, it was unlikely he spent nights in the car due to the snow during that period. On February 3rd, a debit card with Sony's name and several recent purchase receipts were found inside the car. That same day, the police examined the clothes placed in storage at the hotel, hoping to find DNA or other evidence, but came up empty-handed. Adding to their frustrations, Lacketh had to be released due to insufficient evidence linking him to Sony's disappearance. Meanwhile, Sony's cousin and her mother endured the painful task of going to the hotel to collect Sony's belongings. Her cousin had a terrible premonition, but found nothing to support her feelings. On February 4th, the police visited Moody's uncle's house and found a DVD player from the hotel room in Sony's wallet. Moody had given these items to his cousin. The cousin told the police that Lakeith had borrowed the DVD player on January 24th, supposedly to watch a movie, and was driving a red car that day. A few days later, the cousin saw Lakeith again and asked why he hadn't picked up the children on January 27th, but Lakeith avoided the question. When he inquired about Sony's whereabouts, Lakeith left the DVD player and wallet in a bag and left the house. As the days passed, James and Rhonda Sargent requested to be moved from room 222 due to the persistent bad odor. With no other rooms available, they moved to another hotel. Subsequent guests in room 222 also complained about the foul smell. Despite numerous cleanings and a carpet wash in early February, the odor persisted, only slightly reduced for a few days. Sony's family, especially her children, were deeply affected by her absence. Their only hope was for Sony's safe return. On February 4th, homicide detectives visited the hotel. By then, the room had been occupied and cleaned at least 3 times. The detectives did not enter the room, but asked the staff if they noticed anything unusual. All responded negatively. On February 7th, James and Rhonda returned to the hotel, changing rooms 3 times, including spending 1 night in room 222. The sergeants informed the management that the room still reeked of the unpleasant odor. In March, a more thorough cleaning was carried out, which included the carpets, bedding, bathroom curtains, and window drapes. To everyone's dismay, the smell not only persisted, but intensified. The manager discussed the issue with the security guard, and during their conversation, they recalled that the former tenant, Sony, had disappeared at the end of January. The guard remembered the events from that time and suggested that the manager inspect room 222 for blood or cleaning agents. 10 minutes later, the manager returned and asked the guard to accompany him. What they discovered was shocking. The 2 men entered the room, where the manager had removed the mattress from one of the beds, leaving only the frame. The lower part of the bed frame had a sort of enclosure that prevented using the space underneath as an unsightly storage area. However, lifting the box spring revealed a large empty space where anything could be hidden from view. Looking through the solid edges of the frame, they saw something unimaginable, a decomposing body. They called the police, who arrived at the scene shortly after. The bed frame had marks all over it, and there were 2 broken wooden areas. Near the head of the bed was a towel and a cloth bag between the legs of the body, which was wearing a shirt but was naked from the waist down. The forensic team's autopsy determined that the cause of death was strangulation with a coaxial cable. The cable was wrapped around the neck, went under one arm, around the chest, and ended at the back. The forensic examiner concluded that it would have taken at least 2 to 3 minutes of continuous pressure to cause death. DNA samples matched Sony's genetic profile and female markers. Male genetic material was also found on 5 parts of the cable. The main hypothesis was that Sony had already been dead when she was reported missing, and that Lacketh had used the coaxial cable from the DVD player he had borrowed from his cousin, indicating premeditation. Lacketh was found and detained by the police shortly after, not for the discovery of Sony's body, but on a different charge, possessing a firearm despite a prior felony conviction. Nonetheless, at the time of his arrest, he was considered a person of interest since he was the last person seen with Sony alive. Additionally, he was again in Sony's car when he was arrested and sent to the detention facility in Mason. On March 18th, the police announced an internal investigation to determine how the case had unfolded so strangely. He stated that the family deserved answers and explained that while the officers were eager to resolve the case, they had pursued a different path that led away from the room. They also stated that they had ever encountered anything like this, noting that the discovery surpassed fiction and highlighting the drama of domestic violence. He regretted that the room had been cleaned and rented multiple times since Sony's death, complicating the police's evidence collection efforts. This explanation was met with skepticism. Shortly after, Rhonda, one of the first tenants to stay in the room where Sony's body was found, spoke to the media. She mentioned that if the officers had asked to enter the room during their January visit, they would have been allowed. She reasoned that unlike her and her husband, the officers should have recognized the smell of a decomposing body and found Sony much earlier. Finally, the time came to give Sony a loving and dignified farewell. Her funeral was held on March 24th. Sony's children were placed under the care of her sister and her husband. By April 1st, they were making efforts to obtain legal guardianship of the children. She stated that while the children were the primary victims, the lives of everyone in the family were disrupted by the tragic loss. She expressed that while she couldn't bring her sister back, she was determined to care for Sony's children, ensuring they had food, clothing, and toys, and keeping them together as a family. Sony had been a beneficiary of a social program that periodically credited funds to a card for grocery purchases. The card had been loaded shortly before the crime as part of a tax refund on her income. The police tracked the movements of this card, which was found in Lakeith's possession. This effort proved successful, revealing that the card had been used on February 1st, for days after Sony's disappearance, at a convenience store. Sony usually visited the store on the first of each month to withdraw cash using her electronic benefit transfer card. Officers went to the store and asked the owner for access to the footage from their 16 security cameras on the morning of February 1st. At 11:38, the surveillance system captured a man in yellow using Sony's card to buy a bottle of orange juice, withdraw some cash, and purchase a cigar. After making the purchases, he returned to a car driven by another person. With all the evidence against him, the trial for Lakeith began in the first week of February 2014, over 4 years after the crime. By then, the Budget Lodge Hotel had closed. Lakeith pleaded not guilty while the prosecutor described the situation as a very ugly and tragic end to a tumultuous relationship. In contrast, the defense attorney emphasized the lack of conclusive evidence, including witnesses or material proof. He argued that there was no evidence of premeditation, only the prosecution's speculations. He pointed out that the police had found a fingerprint on the bed frame that did not match Lakeith's. He suggested that someone else might have killed Sony, as she had been involved with other men over the years. He insisted that his client had never been arrested for domestic violence against her. Additionally, he revealed something that had not been public knowledge. Sony had moved in with Lakeith again because she had to leave a relative's house due to a rat infestation. On February 6th, the video showing Lakeith using Sony's prepaid card 4 days after her death was presented in court. The defense claimed his calm demeanor during the transaction indicated innocence, while the prosecution saw it as evidence of a cold-blooded and ruthless man unbothered by the crime he had allegedly committed. On February 7, 2014, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and was automatically sentenced to life in prison on February 10th. He appealed the sentence, arguing that the court had erred in considering past domestic violence acts and that the evidence was insufficient. On July 7, 2015, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the conviction, confirming the sentences. In 2013, Jessica Herringer, a 25-year-old woman, disappeared under circumstances from her workplace. The search for her kidnapper spanned several years, during which numerous other women were affected. When the authorities finally apprehended the culprit by chance, they uncovered deeply disturbing details about him. Jessica Herringer was born on July 16, 1987, and resided in Norton Shores, Michigan. She grew up in a modest family with a sister. At 22, Jessica became a mother to a son named Zinn, fathered by her long-term partner, Dakota Quayle Dyer. They were still together in 2013, living in a leased home. At the age of 25, Jessica worked at an Exxon gas station in Norton Shores, located near Lake Michigan. Known for her warm and friendly nature as a manager, she often received praise from customers. To support her cherished 3-year-old son, she frequently took on extra hours. Jessica's diary highlighted her ambitions to learn and advance. She aspired to pursue college studies in accounting, but financial constraints hindered this goal. Dakota was unable to fully support their family, leading to frequent disputes and turmoil in their relationship. The couple was engaged, yet their marriage faced repeated delays due to various factors. On the evening of April 26, 2013, Jessica Herringer was carrying out her regular duties at the Exxon gas station. Her day began with a visit to a nearby store around 3 p.m., followed by a drive to her workplace. She arrived at the gas station around 4:35 p.m., parked her car and started her night shift, which was supposed to end at 11:30 p.m. Jessica was the sole employee on duty that night. At 11:14 p.m., a customer called emergency services reporting his experience at the Exxon station. He had entered the store to pay for his gas and cash but found it unattended. He informed the dispatcher, "I'm not sure what's going on, but there's no one at the station. The door is open and unlocked. Lights are still on, but there's no one to take my payment. There are just my car and another vehicle outside. Why isn't anyone here? It looks very odd." Police reached the Exxon gas station within 10 minutes of the 911 call. During their inspection of the premises, both inside and outside, they found no evidence of a struggle. Everything seemed orderly. Jessica's coat was in the back room, along with her purse containing $400, car and house keys. A solitary drop of blood, later identified as Jessica's, was discovered near the storage area's back door. Additionally, capped from a Walther P22 semi-automatic pistol's laser sight and 2 batteries, likely for a watch, were found on the floor. The gas station's cash register remained undisturbed with all the money intact. The last recorded transaction was at 10:52 p.m. for a lighter. The facility lacked interior surveillance cameras. Positioned next to the cash register was Jessica's pack of cigarettes, suggesting she had briefly left her station with the intention of returning soon. Her locked car was parked outside, but Jessica was nowhere to be seen. She had inexplicably disappeared. Upon discovering the station unattended, police reached out to the gas station's owner, informing them of the situation. The owner subsequently contacted another manager living close by, requesting her to secure the premises. Additionally, police notified Jessica's family of her disappearance. Her parents sought clues to her whereabouts and called her friends. One friend recalled being at the gas station between 8 and 9 p.m. that day, noting that all appeared normal then. Shortly after, a fellow employee arrived to lock up the station. This colleague recounted that around 11 p.m., she and her boyfriend had driven by the station on a motorcycle. They spotted a silver Chrysler Town and Country minivan parked near the rear service door with its back door open. Suspecting Jessica might be involved in theft from the station, they paused to observe further developments. The manager observed a young man with disheveled wavy hair near the minivan, dressed in an orange sweatshirt. She saw him repeatedly open and close the vehicle's rear door before he finally drove off. Police reviewing surveillance footage from surrounding buildings located a video showing a silver Chrysler passing by Exxon gas station at 11:02 p.m. A store employee nearby also spoke to the police, mentioning that he had seen the man in the minivan conversing with Jessica Christian. The employee initially thought the stranger was merely flirting with Jessica, given her attractiveness. He noted Jessica standing outside while the man questioned why she wasn't inside. Both Christian and Jessica's colleague, who had spotted the man by the minivan, contributed to creating a composite sketch of the unidentified individual. He was depicted as a light-complexioned young male with dark wavy hair, a stocky build, and approximately 1.82 m height. The sketch was released 3 days following Jessica's disappearance. Despite numerous calls received by police in response, no significant leads emerged from the information provided. The prevalence of the silver Chrysler minivan in the United States posed a considerable obstacle in the investigation. In Michigan alone, there were approximately 15,000 vehicles of this kind registered. Identifying the specific driver of the minivan linked to Jessica Hinger's disappearance became a daunting challenge given the vast number of identical models. Initially, Jessica's boyfriend Dakota Quayle D was a suspect in her disappearance. He acknowledged their frequent arguments, but denied ever physically harming her. Dakota actively cooperated with the investigation, informing police that he was at home with their 3-year-old son on the night Jessica vanished. Without access to a car, he couldn't have traveled to her workplace, and his phone records, once verified by detectives, confirmed his presence at home that evening. This led to his exclusion from the suspect list. The investigation revealed that Jessica had numerous admirers due to her amiable and outgoing personality, which sometimes led to misunderstandings. One such admirer was Jess Ammerman, a 37-year-old married plumber. He visited Jessica at the gas station around 9:30 p.m. on the day she disappeared and confessed his love and willingness to divorce his wife for her. However, Jessica rebuffed his advances, then left the station and called his wife. They spoke for about 50 minutes before he returned home. Following his interrogation, a polygraph test, and an interview with his wife, Jess Ammerman was also eliminated as a suspect. Rob Follett, the brother of the Exxon gas station's manager, subsequently emerged as another individual involved in this case, though context-wise specifics about Rob's involvement were not provided. Identified as the next suspect, he mentioned visiting the gas station around 9 p.m. on the day Jessica disappeared. Upon greeting her, he noticed she seemed downcast. Asking about her mood, Jessica confided in having family troubles. Rob suggested she could stay with him, but she declined. After a short while at the station and making a purchase, Rob left for a night fishing trip at the lake. Detectives checked Rob's phone records for that evening, which corroborated his account of leaving the gas station for fishing. Consequently, Rob Fillet was eliminated from the suspect list. Search and rescue operations for Jessica Haringa were launched using helicopters, expertly trained canines, and extensive searches of residential and commercial properties, woods, and Lake Michigan. Despite these exhaustive efforts, no leads were found, leading to an impasse in the case. Nearly a year later, in February 2014, a similar event occurred in Michigan. A small blonde, bespectacled woman was assaulted by a man while returning home late at night. She was kidnapped, taken to his apartment, and attacked. Despite threats to her life, she was released after several hours. The perpetrator was identified as 42-year-old Brad Allen Mason. Mason was swiftly located, but resisted arrest by brandishing a fake firearm at police officers, resulting in his fatal shooting. Mason had a history of criminal activity, including a 2004 kidnapping conviction and a 2011 arrest for indecent exposure. In 2014, he resided in a dormitory opposite the Exxon gas station where Jessica worked. However, investigators found no evidence linking Mason to Jessica's disappearance. 2 years after Jessica Haringa's disappearance, in 2016, another incident involving a young woman occurred late at night. Returning from a party at a friend's house, she became disoriented on a dark street. A man in a silver minivan approached her asking if she was okay and offering her a ride. She refused but requested to use his phone instead. The man consented, but only if she entered the minivan. Once inside, he locked the door and revealed his phone battery was dead, then brandished a gun, instructing her to stay silent. These cases highlight ongoing challenges faced by law enforcement in solving abduction instances, despite rigorous investigative efforts and community cooperation. He then began driving, feeling sick and nauseated. The woman requested him to lower the window. Seizing the opportunity, she leaped out of the moving vehicle through the window and fled to a nearby house. The man sped away. The victim immediately contacted the police and described kidnapper. Through surveillance footage, the police managed to trace the license plate of the silver Chrysler Town and Country. They identified the driver as 46-year-old Jeffrey Willis. Jeffrey Willis, a factory laborer, led a secluded, modest life and had no prior legal issues. When located in his minivan, police searched and found a Walther P22 semi-automatic pistol. The gun was traced back to a colleague of Jeff, who had reported her laser-sighted gun stolen some time ago. Willis was arrested and detained. A search of his residence uncovered a box filled with various BDSM paraphernalia, including handcuffs, chains, rogues, gags, a vibrator, a video camera, and a bullet matching a Walther P22. The box also contained insulin syringes with an unidentified liquid, sedatives, Viagra, lubricant, disposable gloves, and a diagram of a woman's anatomy with marked injection sites. On his computer were numerous videos depicting appalling kidnapping scenes with young women as victims. A hidden hard drive in a ventilation duct contained footage Willis had recorded of his female neighbors swimming without their knowledge. A folder titled Victims on the computer held 2 subfolders, one named for the missing Jessica Haringa and another for a murdered woman named Rebecca. Rebecca Blech, age 36, was tragically murdered on June 29, 2014, roughly a year after Jessica Haringa vanished in an area just 20 minutes from where Jessica worked at the Exxon gas station. Rebecca went out for an evening run, but never made it back home. She was found by neighbors lying on the road with her clothing disheveled, initially leading to the belief that she was struck by a car, although unconscious. Rebecca still had a pulse when discovered. Emergency services were called, but she succumbed to her injuries before they could save her. Autopsy reports revealed she died from 3 gunshot wounds to her back and head, with multiple bruises on her wrists and legs. At the time of her death, the perpetrator remained at large. However, 2 years after Jeffrey Willis's arrest, new evidence linked Rebecca's murder to a pistol found in Willis's minivan. Willis denied any involvement, but prosecutors theorized that he had attempted to abduct Rebecca and bring her to his home. When Rebecca resisted, Willis reportedly shot her and fled. Forensic analysis later discovered Rebecca's DNA on a glove recovered from Willis's residence. Jeffrey Willis was convicted of Rebecca Bletch's murder and received a life sentence. While serving his sentence, he faced additional charges related to the kidnapping of Jessica Heeringer. Despite consistently denying any involvement in Jessica's disappearance, phone records showed that on the night she vanished, he was present at the Exxon gas station where she was last seen. Subsequently, he traveled to his deceased grandfather's house, which is roughly 13 minutes from the station. Upon arriving at his grandfather's residence, police encountered a heavily secured front door. Forced entry revealed an assortment of cleaning products, powders, and bleachers. In the basement, the manufacturing dates on these items aligned with early 2013, matching the time frame of Jessica's disappearance. Colleagues recalled that Jeffrey Willis was notably absent on April 27, 2013, the day following Jessica hearing his disappearance. When he returned to work a few days later, he had conspicuous deep scratches on his face and hands, raising further suspicions among those who knew him. A woman who visited the gas station on April 25th, the day before Jessica's disappearance, later contacted police. She arrived late in the evening and expressed concern about being there alone at such an hour to Jessica herself. Jessica nodded in acknowledgement, appearing anxious and somewhat scared. At that moment, an unknown man inside the station reassured the visitor by saying, "Don't worry, she has customers who look after her." He left the premises. The concerned visitor, still worried about Jessica's safety, stayed in her car outside until Jessica finished her shift and headed home. Tragically, Jessica disappeared the following day in 2016. The witness from the gas station positively identified Jeffrey Willis, recalling seeing him there. Investigators learned that Willis had frequented the Exxon gas station, interacting with Jessica Heeringer on at least 15 occasions. Concurrently, 48-year-old Kevin Bloom, Willis's cousin and a prison guard, was taken into custody. Kevin's inconsistent statements during interrogation eventually led to a confession. He disclosed information about Rebecca Bletch's death that hadn't been publicly known. Kevin also confessed to assisting Jeffrey in concealing Jessica's body. He described how on April 27th, the day after Jessica's abduction, Jeffrey invited him over for a party at his house. Upon arriving at his late grandfather's residence, Kevin saw Jessica for the first time lying on the floor bound and lifeless. The cousins wrapped her body in a sheet, transported it in a car to a forest where Jeffrey had pre-dug a grave and buried her. They then returned home. When Kevin Bloom led the police to the forest to identify the burial site of Jessica Heeringer's body, he spent a considerable amount of time wandering through the area. Despite his efforts, he was unable to pinpoint the precise location where they had buried the body. The trial of Jeffrey Willis commenced despite Jessica Heeringer's body not being found either alive or deceased. The prosecution presented substantial evidence to charge Willis with her kidnapping and murder. Their case posited that Willis had been stalking Jessica for an extended period. On the night of April 26, 2013, he allegedly parked his vehicle near the service entrance of the gas station. Entering the premises, he is said to have struck Jessica on the head with his gun. During this assault, it's reported that the cover of the gun's laser sight fell off and Jessica's blood was spilled on the floor. Willis then purportedly dragged Jessica out through the service exit and placed her in the back seat of his car. He transported her to his late grandfather's house where he committed his most horrific acts. Forensic computer analysis revealed that Jeffrey Willis stored photographs and news articles about the search for Jessica on his computer. Following the investigation's progress, it was discovered Willis used a password displayed on the screen consisting of Jessica's initials and the date April 27, 2013, presumed to be the day she died. Willis consistently denied his guilt, insisting he was at home on the night of her kidnapping. His lawyers argued that there was no direct evidence linking him to the case. No DNA belonging to Jessica was found in Willis's house or car. The defense team suggested that her disappearance might be linked to illegal drug trafficking, since Dakota had mentioned Jessica developed a serious substance abuse problem. Despite these arguments, Jeffrey Willis was convicted of murdering Jessica Heeringer and received a life sentence without parole. Throughout the trial, he displayed neither remorse nor empathy. His cousin, Kevin Bloom, was found guilty of assisting in disposing of Jessica's body. Kevin received a sentence of 2 years in prison and 5 years probation. Suspension from his role in the prison system was yet another blow to Jeffrey Willis. Years after his conviction, the narrative around him took a startling twist. He became a suspect in an older, unresolved case. On October 17, 1996, in Fruitport, Michigan, Angela Thorberg, a young woman, was found dead. Her remained at large. Ed Willis, who graduated from the same high school as Angela in 1988, found himself linked to her 1996 murder. In that year, 28-year-old Willis worked as a janitor at his alma mater. Concerns were raised when the principal noticed his excessive time spent in the computer lab during work hours. A check on his computer activities was initiated by the principal. Although the findings remain undisclosed, Willis was asked to resign immediately following the review. The investigation into Angela's murder continues to be shrouded in secrecy. A decade has passed since Jessica hearing his disappearance, and her remains are still undiscovered. This tragedy sparked a legal battle over the custody of her son Zahn, between Jessica's sister and Dakota, her partner. Ultimately, Jessica's biological family is raising Zahn. In addition to custody disputes, Jessica's parents have been key advocates for legislative changes following their daughter's disappearance. Their efforts led to the enactment of a law mandating gas stations operating at night to install surveillance cameras. The goal is to prevent similar incidents in the future. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.